Hi, I'm McAtee, and today I'll be doing another video on the subject of aquaculture. My first video was called Practical Tips for Aquaculture Operations, where I kind of introduced all these variables and how they relate to each other. Then my second video was called How to Feed Fish in Any Situation, which of course I focused on the variable of feeding. This video I will focus on the variable of stocking density, how that relates to these different factors, and just in general how you should stock your fish. And of course it's going to be different with every system. It's going to be different within the same system over time, and of course will fluctuate with different variables as I'm about to discuss. So this is just to give you a good idea of where to get started when you're first stocking your tanks or raceways, net pens, ponds, whatever the case may be. And it'll change over time. Like I said, you'll have to watch and see how the fish are reacting to how you stock the fish and how the growth and survivorship changes. Just to go briefly back over all these variables, close growth and survivorship are what we're looking to get out of our system. We're wanting to get the biggest fish in the shortest amount of time. We're trying to shoot for optimal growth, and of course we want to have higher survivorship. And factors that are going to affect that I put down as water quality, stocking density, and feeding. Then return to the concept of carrying capacity, which is an ecological concept of, for any ecosystem, there's a certain amount of animals that can survive in it until you run out of resources or there's overcrowding problems where the animals die off. So a given ecosystem can only support a certain number of animals, and I like to use that as a comparison for how we stock our fish and what the different holdings for fish can relatively maintain. We're going to say that our carrying capacity K is going to be our ideal spot of where we can maintain the amount of fish we have. And like I said, going to be different factors that are going to come into play here, but we're just going to say under normal circumstances, we're going to keep our water quality, we're going to say relatively the same. Of course, your stocking density is going to affect your water quality in certain ways, but let's just say for our purposes that water quality is going to be about the same, and we're going to keep our same feed program, like a certain amount of feed to calculate out for each fish. And that changes over time, but we're going to say that have a constant pattern for that. We're not going to go through and change our feeding, just so we keep our focus on our stocking density. And of course, as always, we want to have our high growth, high survivorship. So just starting off, it's going to depend on the system. Like I said, if you got a flow-through system, water quality is typically going to be better. If you got net pens, you're going to have typically good water quality because it's buffered by all the water around it. There's more than just the area of what the net pen contains. So in this case, our water quality is going to be good typically, but there can be other issues. If you're not getting your raceways cleaned, then you can have declines in water quality. And if you're not getting your net pens cleaned out so the water can flow through, you'll have declines in water quality. Then there's things like if you're just having a pond where relatively low flow, you're gonna have you have to pay a lot closer attention to your stocking densities. Will typically be lower for that kind of setup, as well as if you're doing a recirculation system where you're repurposing the water, you'll probably have to be relatively lower with your stocking density on that as well. So a couple of factors just in general that kind of relates across the board. One of the factors I haven't really brought into play is flow rate. If you got higher flow going through, then you got more water coming in, and typically your stocking density can be higher. Then another issue kind of relates to water quality is like your disease control. And of course, if you have any problems with disease, your stocking density can be a lot higher. But typically you're going to run into some disease problems, but could be related to your nutrition or water quality again, so that's why it's variables I haven't really gone over before. But really, you can look up, I'd start off with check and see your specific species and your specific system. Look at the literature on it. There's probably some kind of study where they've come up with a ratio of this many fish to this amount of water. Typically it's like gallons to fish or whatever. And that will give you a good baseline, say, to start off with, figuring out your carrying capacity for your system. And of course you'll have to know the whole size of your system, like all your dimensions of your tanks and so forth, in order to get the amount of water. It'll be affected by the water quality and flow rate, and feeding. Once you get into that, it'll have an effect on whether or not you should stock more or less. But typically, of course, you want to stock as many fish as you can without negatively affecting your growth and your survivorship. And we'll, like I said, we'll just refer to that as K. So we're wanting to stock our fish, keep going up until we hit K, and then leave it there until they grow out and typically get moved to a different tank, in which case you'll start the whole process over again. Then, of course, consequences if you overshoot and stock too many fish, overshoot the K, and what's typically going to happen is you're going to have a major drop. In biology class, they might show you, okay, ideally or whatever in a system, you might have a bunch of individuals and they're increasing in number in the system, and then they level off at K. That's kind of the first thing they show you. But in a real world situation, what you're going to have is, of course, you're going to have fluctuations around K in an ecosystem. If you're only stocking at the beginning, then you're typically not bringing your numbers back up. So what you would have is a situation drop up to here, come up to here, then you have a severe drop down to, say, here. It'll be constant unless you add more animals and just hit that sweet spot of carrying capacity, which is something you'll find with experience as far as, like I said, you can use the literature to give yourself a good baseline to start off, but really it's a matter of going in and looking at your tanks every day, looking at the fish, seeing how they're doing, taking all the measurements on water quality, seeing how they're affected over time in order to get a good rate of relatively normal situation, what this system will hold at K. And then, in theory, you'd have that curve you're looking for of just level off at K, instead of having this drop down, in which case you have losing survivorship. Then, of course, all the fish won't typically die at once, like as soon as they're stocked. So you gotta factor in, or if we overshoot K, I'm gonna be feeding fish, they're gonna end up dying anyway. And some of these fish are going to be taking up feed that other fish could have, so you're going to have a negative impact on your growth as well. Of course, the factor of having an area overcrowded with fish is going to, cause mortality, as well as overcrowded fish typically don't have as good a growth. So really you want to, like I said, do the best to figure out for your system what species you're working with. What to start off with is with your rate of stocking. Then over time, look at your growth survivorship, look at your water quality, look at how they react to feeding, and from there, over the long term, develop your own system for figuring out how much I should stock in a tank. And then, of course, when things change, you'll have to change your stocking densities as well. And see a decline in water quality, and of course you're wanting to decline your stocking density. That way the fish, with the respiration and defecation and all these other factors, like overstocked tanks, will have even worse impact on your water quality and drive it down further. So you want to have a lower stocking density in that situation. And then, of course, when you got more fish in the tank, typically you'd want to feed them more. Of course, you want to see the same amount of growth for a higher number of fish. You're going to have to add more feed, but at the same time, adding more feed and more fish to the system is going to cause a drop in water quality, and which will stress the fish, of course, if they're overcrowded. So really it's a matter of incorporating all these different factors into your management and figuring out over the long term, what's a safe stocking density to start off with, and then of course over time managing to make adjustments as you see different changes unfold. And yep, that's been my experience so far as working in an aquaculture field. There's been different times where I've had to figure this out for tanks and so forth. And I hope it helps you with your experience.